I'm Jennifer Rooks. Welcome to MPBN's Your Vote 2014 United States Senate debate. Our partner for tonight's forum is the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce, and we are coming to you from the Gracie Theatre on the campus of Husson University in Bangor. The debate will last an hour and will feature some broad topical discussions and a lightning round with quick answers, and a chance for the candidates to question each other. The Republican candidate is incumbent U.S. Senator Susan Collins. She was first elected to the Senate in 1996. The Democratic candidate is Shenna Bellows, the former executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Maine. She has not held elective office. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
In the first segment, we're going to tackle broad topics. We want to devote about 4 or 5 minutes to each of these topics. They won't be timed. We hope that each of you will be able to articulate your position as well as your differences with one another. And we've determined the order by lot. Shenna Bellows will go first. And Shenna, the #1 concern of our listeners and viewers, and this has also been shown in the polls, is that people are really concerned about Maine's economy and good-paying jobs. What, as a U.S. Senator, will you do to improve the economy and the kinds of jobs available in Maine?
You're right, Jennifer, and thank you for hosting this. This is wonderful to be here in Bangor, so close to home where I grew up in Hancock. So as I walked across Maine, 350 miles from Holton to Kittery, it's what people said. The #1 issue is jobs and the economy. And I started out my walk in Holton and walked 3 miles with Jim, a potato farmer. And he talked about investment in infrastructure. Because you see, he has a business. He sells his heirloom organic seed potatoes all across the country. But sometimes it takes him 20 minutes to get online. So we talked about if we had universal broadband internet access all across the state and all across the country, then business people like Jim could grow their businesses. And people with good ideas in our local communities could connect with a global economy. So investment in infrastructure is #1. Access to capital for small businesses, and also a fair tax and regulatory environment for all.
Senator Collins, what will you do to create more and better paying jobs in Maine?
Jennifer, as I talk with employers all over the state, I find that there are jobs available, but oftentimes they have a difficult time in finding the employees that have the skills and education needed for those jobs. Indeed, nationwide, about 1/3 of the unemployment rate is due to that gaps in skills. So I've been a strong supporter of a bill which got incorporated into a law in July that would bring together employers, employees, educational institutions, local workforce investment boards to identify the jobs of today and tomorrow and the skills and education that are needed to ensure that our workers have the skills that they need. That's something where the federal government can be very helpful. You can't go into a machinist shop in this state and not find that they have vacancies for machinists. And those are good jobs with benefits and good pay. I've also found that businesses are asking for certainty in the tax code and in regulation, in regulatory policy. We have tax incentives that are on one year, off the next. That causes small businesses in particular to freeze their plans for investment and for hiring. We certainly do need transportation improvements in the state, and I'm fortunate to be the ranking Republican on the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee. And I've been able to secure some $9 million in Tiger grants to help refurbish our railroads, our roads, our bridges, and our ports, such as those in Searsport, Portland, and Eastport. I also would agree with my opponent that we do need to invest in broadband. That's really important as far as allowing businesses to locate in rural Maine. One of the areas where I'm most proud, where I've improved transportation, is getting the trucks that are the heaviest trucks onto the interstates and out of downtown streets and country roads. That has allowed our businesses to ship their products much more efficiently. It's increased safety, it's lowered energy use, and it's reduced emissions.
Moving on to a topic that is very important to both small businesses, large businesses, and homeowners. That's energy costs. Maine, as you all know, is the most oil-dependent state in the nation. And even though we have a little bit of a dip in the cost right now, it's still very expensive and prohibitive for many people to heat their homes. So, Senator Collins, this question goes to you first. What policies will you pursue to relieve the cost burden that overwhelmed so many people in Maine last winter?
This has been a real problem for our state. And one of the policies that I've pursued in Washington is to make sure that we're increasing our investment in energy efficiency programs and weatherization. I've also been a strong supporter of the low-income heating assistance program, which has helped many of our rural elderly and low-income families afford to stay warm in the winter. But weatherization is even a better investment because it prevents those heating dollars from going out leaky windows and uninsulated doors and walls. I also believe that we need to get more natural gas into the state. There's a real bottleneck with the pipelines that we need to get natural gas from Pennsylvania, where it's plentiful, into the state of Maine to help our manufacturers as well as residents. That would make a big difference in our energy costs, particularly electricity. And finally, we need to pursue alternative energy. I'm particularly interested in the deep water offshore energy, wind energy that the University of Maine Maritime Academy, and a consortium of private companies have worked on. That holds great promise. It would help create thousands of good-paying green energy jobs, and ultimately we could be a net exporter of energy to the East Coast.
Shenna Bellows, what is your energy strategy to help relieve the high cost burden that so many people face every winter in Maine?
We need bold, visionary investment in renewable energy to reduce long-term energy costs, to tackle climate change now, which is a real threat to our state and our country, and also to create jobs. We should be investing in solar, in geothermal, in tidal, in properly sited wind, and biomass. Solar, for example, Germany is a world leader in solar energy, and they have a lower solar incidence than we have here in Maine, meaning there's less usable solar sunlight falling on Germany. Maine could be a world leader in renewable energy, and that would reduce energy costs in the long run, which would improve our national security, create jobs now, and confront climate change for the next generation.
President Obama's Affordable Care Act has been in place for about a year now. We have seen the exchanges at work, and we've seen the Supreme Court decision affirming the legality of the Affordable Care Act. Shenna Bellows, do you support the Affordable Care Act, and would you change it in any way? If so, how?
I do, and I support universal health care for all. We should strengthen and expand the Affordable Care Act to cover more people, and we can do that by gradually lowering the Medicare eligibility age, by Medicaid expansion, which Governor LePage, who Susan has endorsed, has vetoed 5 times. So we need to expand access, and we need to fix the provisions of the Affordable Care Act that have created a burden for individuals and small businesses. And we can move toward universal health care for all. You know, my mom's here tonight. She's a home health care nurse, and she sees firsthand the consequences when people go without the preventive care that they need. So investing in primary care and prevention, that's key, and we can do that with universal health care.
Let me follow up. You mentioned Maine opting out of the expansion of Medicare. Do you, and Medicaid, excuse me, do you, as senator, would you push to make that mandatory that states expand?
I would push for universal Medicaid expansion, and I think that's really important because we save money in the long run if we expand primary health care access for all.
Susan Collins, do you support changing the Affordable Care Act, and if so, how?
I do support changing the Affordable Care Act. I think there was a real missed opportunity here. There are a lot of healthcare reforms that both Republicans and Democrats embrace. For example, both parties are for prohibiting insurance companies from discriminating against individuals with pre-existing conditions. Both parties are for tax credits for small businesses to make it easier for them to afford insurance. Both parties are for letting young people, which comprise the largest group of the uninsured, stay on their parents' policy until age 26. So I think it's unfortunate that it devolved into such a partisan debate when there were many issues in healthcare reform that we could have worked on together. There are some provisions of the Affordable Care Act that I think are particularly problematic. In some cases, it's led to fewer choices. I've heard from families in Maine who no longer are able to go to the physician that they've used their whole lives because it's outside of the network of the plans that are available under Obamacare. I've seen higher premiums for many of our small businesses and higher copays and higher deductibles. And of course, there have been billions of dollars of additional fees and taxes that have been imposed by the law, not to mention the hundreds of millions of dollars taken out of the underfunded Medicare program to fund Obamacare. There are two bills in particular that I've introduced to change the law. Both of them are bipartisan. One has to do with the definition of a full-time worker. The definition of a full-time worker has always been 40 hours a week. Under Obamacare, it's 30 hours a week. Well, the result of that has been seen right here in Bangor, where the superintendent has told me that she has to now cap the number of hours a week that substitute teachers can teach, because otherwise they're going to have to come into the system, be covered by Obamacare. Well, think about that. That means that they're getting lower paychecks, and the students are having a revolving door of substitutes. I don't think that's good policy. It's going to create a lot of confusion when it goes fully into effect. And I have a bipartisan bill that would change the definition back to 40 hours a week. Even the president has indicated there have been problems in the area. The other area is the mandate that an employer who has 50 or more employees has to comply with all of the provisions of Obamacare. Now, many of those employers are already providing health insurance for their employees. But I can tell you, if they're at 48 or 49 employees, they're never going to hire that 50th employee because they don't want to have to deal with all of the mandates and the paperwork that comes with Obamacare.
Susan Collins, do you support President Obama's current policies to deal with ISIS and other terrorist groups? If not, what should U.S. policy be?
I support some of the president's policies. I think his putting together a coalition that included the Arab nations in the region to fight ISIS and other terrorist groups was a good approach. Where I have some concerns about the president's policy, and I've talked to him directly about this, is whether he is going to be able to have a successful vetting of the so-called moderate Syrian opposition. 3 years ago, we could identify who were the moderates in the Syrian opposition to the Assad regime. Now, the opposition is very infiltrated, and I'm worried that some of the training, equipment, and arms will end up into the hands of ISIS. I think the president was too slow to come up with a policy to confront ISIS. And ISIS is not the only threat that we face. Indeed, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is located in Yemen, is considered to be most likely to launch an attack on our homeland. And that is very worrisome. That is where al-Qaeda's chief bomb maker is. We also have the Khorasan group in Egypt. We have seen a proliferation of terrorist groups so that they are now operating in some 20 countries. And I think the president's reassurances to us that he had decimated core al-Qaeda have turned out, unfortunately, not to be the case.
Shenna Bellows, do you support President Obama's current policies to deal with ISIS and other terrorist groups? And if not, what do you support and what do you not support about that?
Well, let's take a step back. ISIS did not exist in its current form prior to the invasion of Iraq under President Bush, which Susan voted for. What we are seeing now is a product of a misguided policy, a war that cost us over $1 trillion and sent over 100,000 troops in harm's way. And arguably, we are less safe today than we were a decade ago. And Susan voted with the Republicans, and indeed it was a bipartisan effort, but it was wrong to send troops overseas to this war in Iraq. And today, unfortunately, we do see the very dangerous and barbaric rise of ISIS. But I don't think that the right approach is arming the Syrian rebels, groups whose goals we do not share, who may be our opponents in 5 years or 10. And indeed, some of those groups were groups that we were fighting during the Iraq War. And so I think it was wrong and indeed irresponsible for Susan to vote to allow the president to arm the Syrian rebels. And the airstrikes, those blanket airstrikes are harming civilians, and it's created a recruiting tool for ISIS, indeed strengthening, according to news reports, the hand of the Assad regime in Syria, which has not traditionally been an ally. I think we need a more targeted and strategic approach to our foreign policy. And President Obama showed the way when he did what President Bush failed to do in 2 terms, when he killed Osama bin Laden and significantly weakened al-Qaeda with a targeted and strategic special forces operation. That's the type of foreign policy we need. I think we are on the wrong track, and we're continuing down this path toward overseas wars that we cannot afford, that make our country less safe.
Senator Collins, would you like to respond? Yes.
You guessed correctly that I would want to respond to that. First of all, ISIS is just al-Qaeda in Iraq by another name. It has grown in size and sophistication and capability, but it is al-Qaeda in Iraq. Just because it changed its name doesn't mean that it didn't exist. And in fact, this violent Islamic extremist ideology was reflected in the attacks on the World Trade Center in 1993, in the bombings in Africa of 2 of our embassies in Tanzania and in Nairobi in 1998, and of course in the horrendous terrorist attacks in 2001, which claimed nearly 3,000 lives. All of those clearly preceded the Iraq War. So to say that this Islamic extremist ideology developed in the wake of the Iraq War is simply wrong.
Shenna, I'll give you a chance to say something more.
And that's not what I said. And what I said was it is a mistake to be arming these Islamic extremists in the Middle East, and that what we see, the chaos in the Middle East, is a product of the wrong foreign policy. Susan has been in office for 18 years, and she has backed overseas military interventions over and over again, which have cost the American taxpayers over $1 trillion that we could have invested here at home in our local economy.
Okay, I think we know the difference in your positions on this. We'll move along. Shenna Bellows, people are very nervous about the Ebola outbreak in Africa, whether it may spread in the United States, and what kind of, how horrible it can get in Africa. Is the Obama administration doing enough to combat the spread of this disease, both in the United States and in Africa? And if not, what more should be done?
First, I will say that I want to applaud Sheila Davis, who is a native of this area, who is overseas in West Africa now, helping lead the fight to confront Ebola. And what we need to do is to stop the epidemic where it is in West Africa, with an increase in aid to countries in West Africa. What we do not need is the travel ban that my opponent has suggested. Experts say that a travel ban would make us less safe by limiting the ability to get relief to West Africa and by limiting the ability to monitor travel back to this country. And additionally, the lack of preparedness now that the Maine State Nurses Association and nurses across the country are talking about, it's a group that's endorsed me, that lack of preparedness is a direct result of Republican votes for sequestration, a bill that Susan voted for that has undermined funding for the CDC and the NIH, funding that the NIH director said, without that funding, they have not been able to develop an Ebola vaccine, and if they had had appropriate funding, they might have been able to do so. So we need comprehensive, strategic thinking about the overall budget, and we need to invest in emergency preparedness over the long term and invest in public health infrastructure. And that's what Republicans have been blocking over and over again, and it's making us less prepared.
Susan Collins, what's your ideal response to the Ebola outbreak?
Well, first of all, it has to be a comprehensive approach. And, excuse me, we do need to increase preparedness at our hospitals. And in fact, the president requested additional funding, which I strongly supported, and which we voted on right before we adjourned. And my opponent has said that she would have opposed the bill that included that funding that was essential to fight the Ebola crisis. We also need to establish regional centers to treat people with Ebola in this country. It's simply not feasible to expect each one of the 5,000 hospitals in this country to have the resources, the expertise, the gear, the know-how to deal with this epidemic. I support a limited travel ban from the 3 African countries in Western Africa that are most affected, with an exception for healthcare workers and aid workers. We don't want to turn our back on Africa. We want to help them get a handle on it. But my first priority is to protect Americans. And just yesterday, the Obama administration announced travel restrictions, saying that people whose travel originated in these 3 West African countries could only arrive at 5 American airports where they would be carefully screened. And I want to tell you what the president said about this. The president's press secretary said that President Obama changed his view on travel restrictions after hearing from scientists and other experts. So the scientists and other experts recommended to the president that he put these restrictions in place. I'm glad he did. And today the administration went even further and said that individuals coming from these 3 countries should be closely monitored by the federal government for 21 days to make sure that they do not have this highly contagious disease. Until this epidemic is under control, I think the steps that the president has taken make sense, and I would go a bit further with this limited temporary travel restriction.
Shenna, I'll let you quickly respond to the discussion about the bill that was passed before recess.
So the American Association of Medical Colleges wrote a letter to senators just a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if you read it, Susan, but what it said was that we need to get away from these short-term crises, and we need to invest in the long term for public health. So the bill that passed just before session was an emergency bill to arm the Syrian rebels, to engage in airstrikes in Iraq, and I said that I am concerned about arming the Syrian rebels, and what I think we need instead is, instead of Republican obstructionism, which brought us to sequester, which has underfunded the CDC and the NIH over time and made us less prepared, we need to be more strategic and visionary in our thinking about the budget and invest in the public health system, not just when we're in crisis, but over time, strategically.
Susan Collins, would you like to quickly respond?
I would. The bill that we passed included $88 million to fight this crisis. And Shenna said very clearly on her website that she would have voted against this bill. In addition, the administration has said that the funding that the CDC had was adequate to deal with this crisis. There have not been huge cuts in the CDC, nor in the agency that is known as BARDA, which was created in the wake of the anthrax attacks that occurred in 2001. And both have been adequately funded according to the administration's own experts.
Okay, we're going to try to squeeze in one more question before our first break. Susan Collins, Congress is likely to tackle immigration reform in the coming session. What are your views on whether the nation's immigration system needs to change?
Our immigration system is clearly broken. I support comprehensive immigration reform. Right before the recess, Angus King and I and several other senators went to the southern border where we talked with the teenagers and children who were coming across the border. More than 60,000 of them have arrived in this country from Central America. That clearly shows that we do not have good control of our borders. So we need to have strong border control, but we also need to have a plan to deal with the 12 million people who are here illegally. It is not practical to somehow round them up and ship them back to their home countries. I think what we need to do is to distinguish between those who stood in line and got here legally versus those who came here illegally, and that's why I supported the immigration reform bill that required them to be current in their taxes, to have worked, to pay a fine, to learn English, put a series of requirements before they would be allowed to stay in this country and eventually work towards citizenship.
Shenna Bellows.
My grandparents were immigrants. My grandpa Andy, Andre DeVoe, came here from France as a child. His mother worked as a housekeeper. He went to college. He started his own business, became an entrepreneur employing others. My grandmother came here from Scotland. And so I think it's so important. We are a nation of immigrants. I think we can all agree that our current immigration system is broken. And so we need comprehensive immigration reform to create a pathway to citizenship for people who come here for a better life, to make America what it represents.
All right, well, that ends our first section, and we will be right back after a short break.
This is a box that showed you a world beyond your own. It was just a box, but the world has changed, and so have we. And now the box can be almost any size or shape. And you decide what you want to see. Anytime, any place. Break out of the box with PBS. We're with you for life.
MPBN's Your Vote 2014 website offers you Maine's most complete political resource, including in-depth candidate profiles and interviews from MPBN's award-winning radio news programs, and a comprehensive grid that easily allows you to compare where each candidate stands on the key issues, plus all of our Your Vote 2014 televised debates available for streaming 24/7. It's all online in one spot, mpbn.net/yourvote.
And welcome back to MPBN's 2014 Your Vote debate between the Senate candidates, the candidates for U.S. Senate, Susan Collins and Shenna Bellows. The next segment of the debate features your questions. These are questions from members of the public who sent them in by email. And the first question will go to you first, Shenna, and it's from Janet, who lives in Reedfield. Specifically, can you lay out what policy changes, if any, you would make to Medicare and how you would propose making Social Security solvent beyond 2033 so that my generation can have the same benefits our parents do and did?
This is such an important question here in Maine. We need to strengthen and expand Medicare and Social Security. I have proposed scrapping the cap on Social Security, because right now, people making more than $117,000 a year stop paying into the system. That's not fair. If we scrap the cap so that millionaires and billionaires pay their fair share, then we'll have more revenue, so we can increase Social Security benefits now for our seniors and strengthen Social Security for the future. With Medicare, we need to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices and to lower costs. And we need to lower the eligibility age of Medicare over time to expand access to Medicare for all.
All right, Susan Collins, Janet in Reedfield wants to know how you will make Social Security solvent, and she also wants to know about Medicare.
Social Security is one of our most important social programs. It's made the difference between poverty and an adequate standard of living for so many Americans. But the fact is that it's growing broke. The Disability Trust Fund will be out of money in just 2 years. By the year 2033, Social Security will only be able to pay about 75% of the benefits that are due. We have to take a comprehensive look at Social Security. I do not favor increasing the tax rate, which is 6.2% for the individual, 6.2% for the employer, because I think that would be very burdensome for working families and for small businesses. But I agree that we should take a look at the tax cap. It used to be that the tax cap covered 83% of wages. It covered 93% of wages. It now covers 83% of wages. But that's not going to do the whole job. That will only get us less than halfway there.
We're out of time. I have to move on. The second question from Carmen in Thomaston. There has not been a congressional budget for 5 years or so. Please tell us what you plan to do about this failure to take care of urgent business. And further, would you bring all parties together to work on a new revision of the tax code? Susan Collins.
We finally did get a budget this past year. It was negotiated by Democrat in the Senate, Patty Murray, and a Republican in the House, Paul Ryan. But the listener is exactly right. It had been years since we had a budget, and that was one reason that the debt has climbed to $17 trillion. And I think that most people cannot imagine our operating without a budget because we're not setting priorities. So I think that that is a real problem. I would bring people together. We should have a budget by March 15th of every year, and that would help to guide the appropriations process, and that is the best way for us to set priorities and to make sure that we're keeping within the budget caps.
All right, Shenna Bellows, Carmen in Thomaston wants to know if you would bring all parties together to work on a new revision of the tax code.
Yes. Budget and tax policies in Washington favor the wealthiest individuals and the wealthiest corporations at the expense of working families. In the last 18 years that Susan's been in office, the rich have gotten richer, the poor have gotten poorer, and the middle class is disappearing. We can build a bipartisan coalition, just as I did when I was in the American Civil Liberties Union on civil rights and privacy legislation. We can build a bipartisan coalition around common ground, around common principles, to create a tax code that is more fair to working families, to make sure that the wealthiest Americans pay their fair share, and also to create a budget that refocuses priorities on investing in local communities and jobs and education and healthcare, and stop spending so much money on overseas wars, on surveillance programs we can't afford, and on the criminal justice system, which is out of control. That's what I would do to bring our budget and tax priorities more in line with the needs of working families here in our state.
Shenna Bellows, the third question is from Sandra in Falmouth. She writes, I would love to hear the candidates' opinions on the millions of dollars being spent for both the Senate race and the gubernatorial race by national parties, especially when Mainers are going hungry or without medications or without jobs.
Our campaign finance system is broken. We have a Congress of millionaires and billionaires, and people like me, the daughter of a carpenter and a home health care nurse, don't run for federal office very often. We need to overturn Citizens United because corporations are not people, and Susan was wrong when she voted against the constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. We need a public financing system, a national clean election system, just like we have here in Maine, so that working people can run for office and lead in Washington. And we need stronger disclosure laws, because right now, a lot of those television ads, no one knows who's paying for them because of the flood of dark money into the system. And Susan voted against the Disclose Act twice. Those are 3 things we can do to reform the campaign finance system. And I will fight to reform the campaign finance system because it is broken. And in my campaign, I'm proud that we haven't taken any corporate PAC money. Susan's taken over $1.9 million. And the majority of our contributions are from small dollar donors.
Thank you. Susan Collins, Sandra in Falmouth wants to know your opinion about the millions of dollars being spent in this race, especially when so many people are having a tough time of it.
Well, there is too much money that's spent on campaigns, but you will notice, in sharp contrast to Shenna, that every single ad that I've run has been a positive ad. And I think that's what the people of this state deserve, not negative ads that distort my record. Now, there's a certain irony here, and that is that Shenna has brought up the constitutional amendment that I opposed, and it is strongly opposed by her former boss, the American Civil Liberties Union, because they warned that it would open the door toward government regulation of free speech, and it would have many unintended consequences. Similarly, the ACLU, while Shenna was working for the ACLU, and I did not hear her dissent, also opposed the Disclose Act because it wasn't fair. It exempted some organizations altogether. That's not fair. I was a strong supporter of the McCain-Feingold bill.
The 4th question is from Clayton in Etna. Maine has over 100 weekly farmers markets where you could buy fresh, delicious, locally grown food directly from those who grew it. When's the last time you shopped at one? And what was one thing that you bought?
Well, the last time I shopped at one was in early September. And it was at the farmers market that is in downtown Bangor, right across from the library. It's set up every Sunday. It has wonderful fresh produce. And one of the things that I bought were multicolored carrots. I had never seen anything other than orange carrots before. And it was great fun to buy those, as well as fresh beets and fresh lettuce, and it was a lot of fun. Coming from Aroostook County, as I do, I have a real appreciation for our family farmers. I also bought some fresh blueberries, which I made a absolutely delicious blueberry buckle with, which I'd be happy to share the recipe. It's my mother's recipe.
Shenna, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, it's when I last shopped at a farmer's market. I joke that I ate my way across Maine when I walked 350 miles from Holton to Kittery. And we walked through farmers markets in Waterville. We walked through farms and with farmers. And I love blueberries. And I also love cherry tomatoes. So those were my favorite purchases at farmers markets. My husband and I shop regularly at farmers markets, and also the Apple Orchard in Manchester, where we live now. And in fact, my husband was at the farmers market last week.
All right, well, we have a new section now. This is the chance for you to ask each other questions. We're gonna try to control this. Each of you has 20 seconds for a question, a minute for the answer, and there will be a chance for a short rebuttal. And so we're gonna begin with Shenna. Shenna Bellows, you have a chance to ask Susan Collins a question.
Why have you co-sponsored Ted Cruz's bill, the Obamacare Repeal Act?
Well, Shenna, as you know, I voted against Obamacare, and I've explained why. I think there were many other ways that we could have gotten to healthcare reform. But at this point, now that the law has been in place, I believe that we should try to fix the most egregious flaws. I don't think that outright repeal would go anywhere, because obviously the president would veto it. So rather than sending the president a bill that would surely be vetoed, I believe that we should try to fix the numerous problems with Obamacare. And contrary to what you've been saying, I have never been for just repealing Obamacare. I have always said that it should be replaced by a better approach.
All right, Shenna, chance for a short rebuttal.
So I've read the Obamacare Repeal Act, and it says simply that the Obamacare shall be repealed, and you're an original co-sponsor still. So have you removed your name in the last week?
Well, let me explain the way this works. I have a series of bills and proposals that I've put forth that I've advocated for years. For example, generous tax credits for people who are self-employed so that they could afford health insurance, tax credits for our small businesses, the bills that I mentioned on the 30-hour work week, on the employer mandate. So you have to look at the whole record, and that I'd be happy to provide you with more information on those, or you can go back and read my floor statement that I made in 2008 when the Obamacare bill passed.
All right. Susan Collins, you have a chance to ask Shenna Bellows a question now.
I'd be glad to. Shenna, you've endorsed increased spending in at least 15 programs that already add up to trillions of dollars in spending over the next 5 years. You've proposed major expansions, we heard it again tonight, in the Medicare program, despite the fact that that program has severe financial problems. You've also proposed increases in programs like NASA, which you said are a priority. So you seem to be telling the people of Maine that your approach will be to ask the taxpayers to foot the bill as the federal government tries to spend its way out of most problems. We're already saddling the next generation with an enormous debt of $17 trillion. We're on our way to having a $500 billion debt for this fiscal year, deficit for this year.
Shenna answer the question.
So how are you going to pay for all of this? That's my
In 18
question.
years, it is this Congress, with the war in Iraq costing over $1 trillion, with tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, that has left us with this debt that has mortgaged our young people's future. And I have proposed a $200+ billion investment in universal broadband that we could pay for if we cut defense spending and cut surveillance systems that spy on ordinary Americans and reduced spending on incarceration. I have proposed scrapping the cap so that the wealthiest Americans pay their fair share so that we can increase Social Security benefits for seniors at home right now. I've proposed reducing the interest rates on student loans for students and paying for it with a financial transactions tax for people who are currently making money on Wall Street and not paying anything in taxes. So everything that I have proposed, I have also suggested how we pay for it. We need a different approach. Don't say that this Congress or your leadership has been fiscally responsible.
Susan, a quick chance for a quick rebuttal.
Well, first of all, if you confiscated all of the income that everyone who makes $1 million or more in this country has, it would amount to $938 billion. If you took every penny, not just increased their tax, but took every penny, that does not begin to cover the increased spending that you are proposing. And cuts in military spending at a time when the Obama administration has already cut spending by $800 billion in this dangerous world would be foolhardy.
Shenna, you can ask Susan Collins a question.
Susan, you have said that you voted against raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour because $21,000 a year is too much. You have proposed $9 a year, $9 an hour, or $18,000 a year. How would you feed a family on $18,000 a year?
Well, clearly that is not a livable wage, and I'm curious what you think a livable wage would be if you think that a minimum wage should produce a livable wage. It would have to be far higher than $10.10. This is the situation that we're in. First of all, I support an increase in the minimum wage. I've proposed an increase to $9 an hour because the independent Congressional Budget Office says that if we go with a 40% increase to $10.10, that it would cost our economy some 500,000 jobs. And those are largely going to be jobs held by low-income people. So I don't think that that's the answer. Shenna mentioned the other night that 13 states had increased their minimum wage. Not one of them has gone to $10.10. Rhode Island increased it by 25 cents.
Thank you. Shenna Bellows, do you like to rebut?
13 states did raise the minimum wage this year and saw job growth more than states that did not raise the minimum wage. So the scare tactics suggesting that jobs might be lost if the minimum wage were increased are simply not borne out by the evidence. And there is something deeply wrong when members of Congress who make $174,000 a year think that $10.10 an hour is too much. You know, I've talked to a lot of small businesses in Maine, and they say they pay their employees more than the minimum wage because businesses need customers.
Thank you.
And when you pay workers more, there's more money in their pocket.
Thank
it grows
you,
the
Susan
economy.
Collins. You can ask Shenna Bellows a question now.
Well, first let me say that 2/3 of the individuals who make the minimum wage get an increase within that year. 25% of those who make the minimum wage are teenagers. I'm going to turn to your support for a government-run, single-payer healthcare system such as Canada and Great Britain have. In northern and eastern Maine, we see Canadians coming here for cancer treatments, for MRIs, for other medical care, because in Canada, you have to wait, on average, 2 months for an MRI, a whole month for a CAT scan, 4.5 months for necessary treatment after you've been referred to a specialist, 9 months for a senior to get a joint replacement. Canada ranks far higher for mortality due to cancer than does the United States. In America—
Can you ask the question, please? Thank you.
My question is, why do you support a single-payer, government-run, top-down Washington system when we see people from Canada coming here for treatment?
Shenna.
I support universal health care for all because I believe health care is a human right. And if we invest in health care, in prevention, in primary care, then we will see better long-term health outcomes. We will see less disease and less mortality. Countries like Canada and Europe do have better health care outcomes and are spending less money. The inflation of health care costs in this country and the level of medical bankruptcies is out of control. You know how many medical bankruptcies there were in Canada? 0. And that's because there's basic health care for all, and that is so important. We can do it. We have a government-run system for health care right now. It's called Medicare, and it's working quite well.
Go ahead, Susan Collins.
First of all, there's a difference between universal access to health care, which is a goal that we all embrace, and having a government-run single-payer system, which is what Shenna has endorsed. And I think we've got to be very clear about what that means in terms of care. There's a reason that in Great Britain, an individual, a man who's diagnosed with prostate cancer, has only a 50-50 chance of surviving beyond 5 years. In our country, it's a 91%
Thank you.
chance.
We have to take a break. We'll be right back.
MPBN's Your Vote 2014 website offers you Maine's most complete political resource, including in-depth candidate profiles and interviews from MPBN's award-winning radio news programs, and a comprehensive grid that easily allows you to compare where each candidate stands on the key issues, plus all of our Your Vote 2014 televised debates available for streaming 24/7. It's all online in one spot, mpbn.net/yourvote.
And welcome back to MPBN's Your Vote 2014 debate between the candidates for U.S. Senate. The next round is our lightning round. These are questions that are meant to be answered once with 1 or 2 words, yes or no, maybe a whole sentence, but no more, please. Susan Collins, do you support the anti-bear baiting referendum, question 1 on the November ballot?
I don't take position on state referendum. I never have, but I would urge people to listen to the experts.
Shenna Bellows.
No.
Shenna Bellows, would you support the no tax pledge being pushed by Grover Norquist?
No.
Susan Collins?
No.
Susan Collins, would you support allowing so-called tar sands oil from Canada to pass through a pipeline in Maine for export?
Yes. Wait a minute, I want to make sure I understand. Are you talking about the Maine-Montreal?
Yes.
I believe there needs to be a full environmental study in order to answer that question.
Okay, Shenna Bellows.
No. And I also oppose the Keystone XL pipeline, which Susan voted for twice because climate change is real. It threatens our health and our
Okay, yes or no
environment.
questions, please. Do you support federal funding for Amtrak?
Yes.
Susan Collins.
Yes.
Susan Collins, would you vote for term limits for members of Congress?
No.
Shenna Bellows.
I voted for term limits when Maine passed them.
Shenna Bellows, do you agree with a woman's right to choose as outlined by Roe versus Wade?
Yes.
Susan Collins.
Yes.
Susan Collins, should local law enforcement agencies be allowed to use surveillance drones?
Again, I think that's a local and state issue, but what I can tell you I've done at the federal level is to require justifications from the administration and opposed to the use of drones for surveillance at the federal level.
Okay,
Sorry.
you get a whole sentence.
So I led the effort, part of a coalition here in Maine, to place checks and balances on the use of drones, to prevent the use of drones for surveillance purposes.
Okay.
And to allow law enforcement to use them for search and rescue in emergency situations, but
Shenna
not
Bellows,
surveillance.
should the United States further reduce its number of military bases?
No.
Susan Collins.
No.
Susan Collins, do you support increasing grants from the federal government for higher education?
Yes,
Shenna
depending on
Bellows.
what they're for.
Yeah. Shenna Bellows, grants from the federal government for higher education.
Absolutely. And student loan reform.
Shenna Bellows, should the federal government legalize the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes?
Yes.
Susan Collins.
For medicinal purposes only.
Susan Collins, should the federal government regulate and require labeling of genetically modified food, GMOs?
Probably, but we need to do a lot more work on how that should be done.
Okay, Shenna Bellows.
Yes, and Susan was wrong when she voted against Sanders' GMO labeling bill.
Shenna Bellows, do you support the proposal that would allow internet access based on ability to pay? We're talking about the net neutrality legislation.
I support net neutrality and internet freedom. We need to maintain people's ability to access the internet.
Susan Collins.
We should not be allowing internet providers to control and favor some content over others.
All right, I know the audience loves the lightning round, but we're out of time for that. So we have the closing statements now. Each candidate will have 1 minute to speak directly to our audience. We determined the order earlier by a coin toss. Susan Collins, you will go first.
For a state of just over 1 million people, Maine has elected remarkable senators. Edmund Muskie, Margaret Chase Smith, Bill Cohen, George Mitchell, Olympia Snowe. They represented different parties, but they had in common a commitment to civil, honest debate, to progress based on bipartisan compromise, and to a better life for the people of this state. I have worked hard each and every day since I was elected to uphold this proud tradition. When government shut down last year, I put together a coalition of 7 Republicans, 6 Democrats, and Angus King, and we hammered out a compromise that led to the reopening of government. That is how government can and should work, and that is the approach that I want to continue to take. I ask for your vote on November 4th.
Shenna Bellows.
This race is more than just the policy differences between Susan and me, although those are significant. This is about 2 different visions for the future. In Waltham, not far from here, tonight, my sister is putting her 3 kids to bed, while their father serves overseas in Kuwait. I think about the dangers my brother-in-law faces overseas. I think about the future for my nieces and my nephew. What kind of world are we leaving for them? We cannot afford Republican gridlock in Washington or to pretend that things are okay. Things are not okay when thousands of Maine workers are without jobs tonight. Things are not okay when student debt exceeds $1 trillion. Things are not okay when climate change is hurting our farms and our fisheries. A vote for Susan is a vote for Republican control in Washington. If you share my concerns, but also my hopes that we can do better, that we must do better, then I ask for your vote on November 4th.
Thank you very much to both candidates for appearing tonight and taking part in this debate. And thank you to our partners in this production, the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce and the New England School of Communications on the campus of Husson University. And thank you for joining us. All of our Your Vote 2014 debates will be rebroadcast several times on MPBN television and radio between now and Election Day. For those air times, please visit mpbn.net/yourvote. Our Your Vote 2014 website is also a great place to learn more about the candidates and to see our grid outlining their positions on major issues. And of course, join MPBN Radio for full election night coverage November 4th and the following day, a morning edition, Maine Calling and Maine Things Considered. We hope you'll take the time to vote. For MPBN News, I'm Jennifer Rooks. Thanks for joining us.